All right, welcome back to the actual final, and I promise you this is the last segment of the Crop Keeper paper mache tutorial. We're going to finish up the paint on this guy. Where we left off last time, I finished the tree. I still need some work, some painting to bring out more of the textures, add in some green, maybe a little bit of a lighter browns in there on the tree branch arms and hands. And then I did a little bit more work here off camera on the painting of my jack-o'-lantern. What I ended up doing is I put in a little bit more of the nutmeg brown in these recessed areas where the ridges are, in between the ridges here. Darkened it a little bit more. And then I also went in with a different orange. This is a harvest orange. And in some of these areas, I basically painted over and blended in with a little bit of the brown on the sides. But the raised areas, I painted that over with a little bit of this outrageous orange. I think it looks better than what I had before. It was just, if you recall, it was a little bit of the brown mixed with pumpkin orange. And then I went over just to highlight the ridges with more pumpkin orange. But it wasn't as vibrant. And yes, I wanted it to be a darker kind of a pumpkin, and it still is, but it seemed too muted to me. But that's why I went in with more of the harvest orange. So what I suggest is when you're painting anything, play with your colors. You know, play with the blending. Anytime that you use a brown and an orange together, mixed together, you're going to get a darker orange. So keep that in mind. But mix some colors together, play with some colors, put them on, you know, paint it on. If you don't like it, again, you know, you could repaint the whole thing. It's good practice. And honestly, I do not claim to be the best painter in the world. I absolutely am not. But this, you know, the dry brushing technique and all of these other techniques and blending of the paint and those types of things seem to work. They work for me. The end result tends to be a good one. But if you have a painting practice or method that you've been using and it works for you, keep using that method. It's great to try different things though, so I encourage you to do that. But you know, if something isn't broken, don't fix it. You know, don't waste your time fixing it. But by all means, I do encourage you to try different things, blend paints, and put them on there and see what happens. So this is completely dry, and I'm going to move on now, and I'm going to concentrate on this jack-o'-lantern. I'm going to paint the stem, and I'm going to paint over these arms and the hands. Alright, first off, in this light here, I have brighter light shining down on my pumpkin guy here. And I think that you could maybe see more of the blending of the brown and the oranges that I used. And then in the certain areas, you could still see where I have more of that pumpkin orange, that lighter orange, and places that it still kind of pops out. I like that. You can see here's another area. I like that. I think I'm going to leave that. But right now I'm going to move on here, and I think I'm going to concentrate on, actually I'm going to concentrate on the arms first so that I have something to kind of hold on to. So what I have done is I'm going to start dry brushing on and basically use the same colors and the same variations as I did on the tree trunk here in the background. So I'm going to start out with a little of the burnt umber, and I'm going to go ahead and use one of my cut down or trim down chip brushes. And I'm going to just start dry brushing on the arms here. Alright, so I have my branches here, my tree branch arms, painted over or dry brushed over with the burnt umber. There are some areas where, you know, you just have to go back. If you have too much white or too much of the black coming out, then, you know, just take your paintbrush and apply a little bit more. But on these vine areas here that are coming up onto my jack-o'-lantern, I've switched over to a smaller paintbrush. This is another cheap artist brush, thinner one, but it does have those stiff bristles that I like for this. And I'm just going to go in and paint over on top of those vines. I'm not concerned if I get a little bit of that paint on my actual pumpkin. It's really not going to stand out that much, and I think it actually makes it look a little bit more cohesive. So that's what I'm doing here. Just going to go around and hit those areas. Got a vine down here, but if you could see here, I kind of really want to get in there around the edge and paint in there. There we go. I already did the other side. That's how that looks. Starting to come together here. I'm going to switch gears and I'm going to go back up to the stem because I have to wait for these arms to dry before I could dry brush on the nutmeg brown over those colors. Trying to pull the colors from this tree into these arms so that these arms and the stem match pretty much, you know, the tree. So I'm just going to go in my stem and dry brush over my stem. Alright, stem is painted over. Using that burnt umber, went in with the smaller paintbrush over what's going to be my vines. These are, I'm going to have those kind of stand out a little bit more. These little textural or sculptural elements in here, that's clay, where you can tell there's a big difference here, right? These are the cotton soaked in paste that I applied, and this is clay. So that's really just kind of part of the stem and not so much vines. And I did get a bunch of the orange paint on those, and that's perfectly, that's fine. It's gonna make it, again, it's gonna make it look more cohesive. I'm gonna start back down here, carrying on with dry brushing on some of that nutmeg brown onto my burnt umber. So basically I'm repeating the paint from the tree onto these tree branch hands and arms here. So going a little bit lighter with the dry brush because I want that burnt umber brown, I want the black, I want a little bit of that speckled of the white dry brush to come through. So I'm going to do that on both of my arms. Alright, so hopefully you can see the color variation with the nutmeg brown over that burnt umber. And I did go in with my smaller paintbrush and I kind of painted in a little bit more in these areas where the vines are. Up on this stem, I'm not going to use the larger brush. I'm gonna concentrate on this smaller brush again with the nutmeg brown, And I just want to kind of come in and highlight all of the raised areas, leaving the rest of the stem that darker burnt umber underneath there. I'll just hit the top of it a little bit, just to add a little highlight on the top. Come in just over pretty much just the center of where those viney bits will be. So not really going into these recessed areas at all. I'm just coming in and putting some highlights over the raised areas. That's all that I'm doing with that. You come in here a little bit where the pumpkin actually meets the stem. You could put a little of the lighter brown in there. You don't need to get crazy with it. All right, while I'm waiting for that other layer of the lighter paint to dry, I'm going to shift gears here and move on to finishing up the arms and the hands on my tree trunk. I don't know how this is gonna look in the end, but we're gonna give it a try. So I have a few different colors of green, because I do want to bring in some green just to bring out the vines. I have a couple of dark greens. This is Christmas green acrylic paint, again Apple Barrel brand, and this is a marsh green acrylic. And then I have a very light spring green. More than likely will not be using this color, but I just put it out there just in case. I think I'm going to start with, let's see how the marsh green looks. May not need anything other than the marsh green. Before I make a decision on which of these two darker paints to use, I'm going to squirt a little on this the newspaper. And I think I'm going to go with that marsh green. It looks a little bit more natural as far as like vine color than that bright Christmas green there. Not going to use a lot of it. So once again, I'm going to go in and I'm going to choose a regular artist brush. These bristles on here are not stiff at all, but it's a smaller artist brush. I'm going to bring this forward. Now I'm going to go really light on this. Sort of again using sort of a dry brush, because I don't know how it's going to look. I mean, I want these vines to stand out, but I don't want it to look like I just like slapped some green paint on. I'm liking that. So go very light. I mean, unless you really want these things to really stand out, then go a little more heavy-handed. Again, you can take a rag. If you get too much paint on a certain area, take a rag and kind of dab it off. And you know, also to keep in mind, once this paint dries, see, I got a little heavy-handed there, and I'm just using my finger to. Once this paint dries, it's not going to look exactly the way it looks when it's wet. It's actually, what I have found with acrylic paints is that once they dry, they actually dry a little bit darker. So I'm going to go ahead, carry on, and just paint over just the vines. And not like the entire vine. I'm leaving some of these areas that are raised, that other color, just pretty much kind of the center. That's what I'm painting. And then once it dries, I'll see what it looks like and if I need to go in and do anything else. All right, that's pretty subtle. And already I could see that it's starting to dry darker than the wet paint. Again, if you missed it, that color is a marsh green. I don't want to put too much in there. I just kind of want, you know, it to stand out, those vines to stand out a little bit. But then, you know, I'm looking and I'm like, I could use a little bit here, could use a little bit more, you know, maybe underneath here. But here's the thing, you gotta, and this is a struggle for many artists. You have to know when to stop, because, you know, if I get to a point where I'm like, okay, this looks good, I like this, I could probably do a little bit more, but then I run the risk of doing too much. Like I was considering coming in and just putting a little green here and there, maybe a little in there. I mean, you know, and you could do that. I'm not going to do any more than that. I'm gonna leave this as is. I like the way it looks. I think it looks pretty cool. It's got that green in there, so it brings out my vines that I worked so hard on. But you could certainly, I mean, you could go in with some more of the green, but it's a good lesson to know when to stop. All right, so I'm going to say that this tree trunk is done. So the only thing I have left to do is to finish up the paint on the jack-o'-lantern. All right, next paint, if you guys recall, after I did the brown or the dark umber brown on the tree trunk and then the nutmeg brown, I went in with a little bit of one of my favorite colors, burnt sienna, and I'm gonna pull that color into my jack-o'-lantern as well. So very minutely, just in raised areas, I'm gonna go ahead and in my arms and in my stem, just little bit. So I'm really knocking off a lot of the paint. I like to have my the very tips of the fingers, just kind of hitting the tips of the fingers there with a little bit more of the burnt sienna. So I'm just kind of here and there, again, just sort of bringing it out. I'm not really brushing, I'm sort of just dabbing. I'm gonna move in with the burnt sienna with my smaller paintbrush here, and I'm gonna do the same thing, just a little bit here and there. Bring out some of the highlights. Not a whole lot, just a little here and there. Again, if you get a little heavy-handed, just knock some of the paint off. Wipe it off with either your fingers or your, you know, a cloth. Put just a little bit more at the top here. I think once this dries and I bring in my marsh green into some of my stem areas and my vines coming down off of my stem, and of course the vines on the arms and the hands, comparatively speaking, I think the textures as well as the colors are going to pull together from the tree trunk to the tree vine hands and the stem onto my jack-o'-lantern. I went in after my little bits of burnt sienna paint dried and went in with the marsh green, highlighted over some of my viney areas on the arms, the hands, and the stem. And I'm quite pleased with that. I think I'm gonna, before I carry on and do any more and run the risk of screwing it up by doing too much, I'm gonna call this done. The final step in my painting process is sealing. And what I use is a spar urethane. This is indoor, outdoor. There's a lot of them on the market, different brands. This one just happens to be Minwax Helmsman Spar Urethane. This is a clear satin. It's going to protect your props against moisture, temperature changes, like humidity, bright sunshine, all those different kinds of things. So I waited about 24 hours after I was done painting before I took this outside in a well-ventilated area and sprayed it. The reason I did that, I waited the 24 hours because I wanted to make sure it was completely dry so that I didn't lock in any kind of moisture from the paint into the sculpture. I did the inside of my jack-o'-lantern because it is hollow, as well as the outside. And I did it a couple of times. I did 2 coats. I waited for it to dry in between those coats before spraying again. Now I suggest that you use some kind of a sealer, whether you're intending on putting it outside or you're going to leave it inside, for a couple of different reasons. One reason is that I think it really makes the color in the sculptures come out, they pop, as well as some of the textures. And then the second reason, and this is a more important reason as well, is that it's going to protect it from dust too. You know, over time things get dusty, they get a little dirty, sometimes a little bit grimy. And if you didn't have your sealer on here, you couldn't take a lightly damp rag and remove the dust with it, because you will run the risk of removing some of your acrylic paint. But having that sealer on there, it protects the paint. You can remove the dust with a lightly damp rag and it won't disturb any of the paint underneath it. So those are my 2 reasons for sealing the prop. And this is also the conclusion of the build from start to finish. If you have watched, I appreciate you watching. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. I have much more coming ahead. Next tutorial coming up will be soon, and it's going to be a paper mache skull and books. Until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.